Today's episode is a really special one for me. Hello, my name's Chingran. I am your guide here at The Invisible Reality, and today's special is discovering a mindset that I've been talking about for quite some time, which is this concept of work-life balance, and is there really such a thing? We pull into perspectives of multiple beliefs that may be limiting us to achieve our greatest gain and our greatest growth. There's no better person to talk about this than Dr. Michael Hersh, a practicing gastroenterologist and a visionary leader in the entire physician community. He's the driving force behind a better physician life. He's not just a physician or a gastroenterologist, he's really a big catalyst for change, and he's really dedicated to transforming the way that we physicians approach our careers and our personal lives and our spiritual lives. We tap into a very deep understanding about why even bother to do this. Like, why bother creating something called Better Physician Life? And I tap into my own understanding of my own beliefs and see if Dr. Hirsch either agrees with me or maybe he has his own perspective. And today's beautiful conversation has been a beacon of hope for me because it really allows me to try to see and plan what the future of medicine really is for physicians. Tharish's work with Better Physician Life is really a testament to his own commitment of helping doctors find joy and purpose in our professions. And this ultimately does lead to better patient care. But we even get into a bit of a topic about should we even leave the healthcare field if we feeling burnout? Or are we going to bring the burnout with us? Anyways, today's episode is going to be super amazing. I can't wait for you to hear it. And I'm actually recording this conversation, this introduction, after the podcast is done because the original one just didn't do it justice. Let's join our conversation between me and Dr. Michael Hirsch. And I hope you take a lot out of this today because I surely did. All right, man. One of the things that I always had a question on for you, and I've been waiting for this interview for a really long time, by the way. You don't even know it because I never told you. Is whenever you're interviewing your guests, like on your podcast, like you're so like zoned into them and you're like extracting the information out. It does take a lot of talent, right? Like, where did that come from? Like, how did you develop those skills?
First of all, thank you so much. It is surprising to me when you say that you've been waiting to do this for so long because, well, I mean, it's just so amazing to hear that how we can build connections with people
Yeah,
and not even completely be aware of how it's
right.
happening. So thank you.
Yeah,
And so to get to your question, I think the listening skills is just something that has built over the course of my career, which primarily has just been clinical work and working as a physician
yeah,
and spending time in the office genuinely trying to listen to people, hear them, and make sure that we're on the same page before we come up with clinical plans and treatment and testing and things like that. And so um a lot of physicians kind of question the whole coaching thing, but I feel like I've been preparing for coaching and podcasting interview my whole life just through my clinical career. And so when I'm interviewing guests on the podcast,
yeah.
I really just am so genuinely interested in their story and what they're saying. And it's so easy to be in it with them, if that makes
Yeah, it
sense.
seems like you're like authentically you, right? And when you're authentically you have an actual invested interest in somebody. The one of the first when I first got on your email list, let's say maybe a year and a half ago, almost 2 years ago, I started realizing, and I analyze vernacular and emails and stuff like that. My background's marketing. I realized a lot of what you say is not only is it authentic, but you reframe a lot, right? You're like, this is it. Let's reframe it. This is it. Let's reframe it. This is it. Let's reframe it. And since then, that's been literally like what's been going on on the emails and even on the podcasts that you have. And I feel that reframing is exceptionally powerful when we look at multiple angles. But reframing is difficult. No? What do you think about?
100%. And I think For me, this was one of the big things that physician coaching has taught me, even before I became a coach myself, is that I was telling myself a lot of stories
Mm,
about myself, about who I was, about what I was capable of,
yeah,
about what people expected of me, about what I expected of myself.
right.
And I was living into that story. All the things I was telling myself was the person I was being. And so when through coaching, I learned to start to question some of those things. And I started to ask myself, it has turned into one of the most important questions I ask myself on a very regular basis, which is that even true? And when you can
Mm.
tell yourself something blindly and then take a step back and ask yourself, is that true? And then actually answer that question, it turns on its head the life that you're living. And you do start to reframe all of these things that you just took for granted and just thought that they were just reality. And you get to start living life in a way that does feel more authentic and real and aligned with how you want to be living.
But I think the problem is, like, we didn't learn any have any official training in this in med school or residency and fellowship, right? And in fact, I would dare to say this. I would dare to say that was taught the opposite, right? Like play defense first before you shoot a three-pointer, right? It's like figure out how to protect yourself first. And when you're in this protection mode, this closeout mode, like how do you be authentically you, especially with patients and colleagues and stuff like that, right? And so going through like med school and residency and training and stuff like that, what tools did you wish that we were taught in training?
Yeah, it's interesting looking back on that time now because I'm super grateful for my medical training. I had an amazing experience all along the way. College, medical school, residency, fellowship, all prepared me for the life that I have today. Looking back on it though, I can see how limiting and restrictive it was for me in terms of how it forced me to live this almost siloed life, right?
Yeah.
So as a parent now,
Yeah.
we teach our kids to dream and to have these big audacious goals and how do we keep reaching for the next level? And I think for me, I was doing that definitely until I got into medical school. And then a little bit even through my medical training. But so I'm a gastroenterologist. I've been out of training now for over 15 years in my current clinical job. But I would say even when I was a resident, kind of aiming for what career path I wanted, I almost didn't even attempt for a gastroenterology fellowship because it was so competitive. And I just was like, nah, I don't want to be that competitive right now. Maybe I'm just going to do something else.
Yeah.
And so when I look back on my training, I can see all of these ways that I had already started to limit myself. Now, luckily, I had some really great mentors who were like, you're not going to do that. You're going to be a gastroenterologist and I'm going to help you get there. And so it really was mentorship that helped me shed some of those limiting beliefs and some of the ways that I was limiting myself. But I think it would have been great if part of medical education was actually indoctrinating us into a belief system where just because you got into medical school doesn't mean you have to start limiting yourself, right? The sky's the limit and you get to decide where you want the trajectory to go.
Yeah, I share the same sentiment. And I haven't announced this yet, but I guess I'll announce it now. That's exactly what we're building at Physician Transformation Institute. We're going to give free resources for mindset and training for medical students and residents and fellows. My sister is the co-founder of our organization, and she currently is a resident. She's interventional radiology. She's much younger than me, 13 years younger than me. And I see that I also wish I had the same thing. But am I grateful? Yeah. Did I find joy in medicine? Yeah, but not all the time and not every day, and that's normal, right? And I think that as we look at the rates of burnouts and depression, and the statistics are quite shocking what those are for people in the healthcare profession and physicians. I see that I wish everyone kind of can hear you, like you're reframing, right? Looking at things different ways and playing this game. Maybe, hey, what if the opposite was true? Or what if we see it this different way? How do we make this grow into something that you see out of curiosity versus out of lack. And it's a skill that I think everyone should really develop. Now, my background is I've advised for startup companies, venture capitalists, acquisitions, and it's the same thing in other businesses as well. There's no difference. The psychology is really all the same. What I found really compelling about Better Physician Life, which is your company, is that not only are we able to create a reframe, we don't have to like, if you're burnt out or depressed, you don't have to exit medicine, right? Tell me a little bit more about that. What do you think about that?
Oh, I think that this is so important, right? Because sometimes if you are in the social media sphere and you're in the physician communities, the physician coaches get taken to task a little bit as if we don't work in clinical medicine anymore, as if this was our big pivot. But I am a full-time practicing gastroenterologist. There were points in my career where I worked 12 days in a row, and now I have created some boundaries around that. So I don't work 12 days a row anymore, but I'm still a full FTE. I still work full-time clinically. I work weekends, I take night call, I do the whole thing. And I started a business, and I created a social media presence, and I wrote a weekly blog post for a year, and I started a podcast. And I think what I am trying to show is that you don't have to leave clinical medicine to explore opportunities outside of medicine. You can if you want to, right? Nobody should feel shackled to a career or a job that they don't love anymore. And you don't have to, right? If you don't want to, you don't have to leave. And I think that was such a pivotal thing for me. I mean, let's face it, I found physician coaching when I was burned out and racing for the exits. I was not sure how long I was going to continue practicing clinically, and exploring all of these other opportunities outside of my traditional job has enabled me to push past all of those things that I was feeling and to continue practicing full time. So actually credit all of these other things to the fact that I'm able to show up to my job every single.
Wow. That's a really amazing outlook. And I think a lot of times people look at people like me and you, and we have always a lot of stuff going on the outside. They don't really see what it took really on the inside. Right. And so, how many kids do you have?
I've got 2
I have
kids.
two kids. So I have three daughters and wonderful wife. My wife's a physician as well. And people from the outside are like, "Well, do you even sleep?" I'm like, "Yeah, I actually sleep pretty well." Or it's like, "Do you like see your kids on the weekends?" I'm like, "Yeah, they're actually involved in everything that I do." And I think there's this misconception that you have to sacrifice more of yourself to produce more, right? Input, output, I call it, right? But what myths would you like to dispel? Like, can you be a great husband and father or wife, right? And at the same time, like do all those amazing things. What do you think?
Yeah, in fact, I think I am a better, we already mentioned doctor, but husband, dad, partner, because of all of this other work that I do, right? Because when I was working and burning myself out in my full-time clinical career and I was unhappy, I was making everybody around me unhappy also.
Yeah.
And when I was able to lean into all of these other things that bring me fulfillment and joy and happiness and make me fundamentally a happier person, then I can utilize that to bring everybody else up around me. So I am a lot busier than I've ever been in my life. And I'm also a lot more present with my family than I've ever been before. And it doesn't mean it's not work, and it doesn't mean it's not a challenge. And I'm so much better at it than I ever was before. And my goal is just to keep getting better at it, regardless of how busy I am.
If I was thinking of making YouTube shorts right now, that would be it right now. I'm busiest that ever been in my life, but I'm the most present. Like that's like an oxymoron, right? Like people are like, "Well, how is that? I don't really see it. I don't really understand it. I don't really get it." But you're right, man. I actually found the same thing. When I started Physician Transformation Institute and understanding the statistics and burnout and stuff like that, and then start curating these programs, and I'm also a practicing physician as well. It's like, wow, like patient care got better. And then I actually train my physicians and my nurse practitioners to say, hey, this is how we should communicate with a whole communication module and discussions, right? Motivational interviewing, whole nine yards, right? And we started doing personality profile and disc profiling within our organization. to see how we can communicate with each other better. And all of a sudden, they're like, "Oh man, like I feel like I'm a pretty good dad all of a sudden. I feel like I'm a pretty good husband all of a sudden. Like, where did that come from?" Right? Whereas before, I'm just like, "Oh my gosh, I'm just taking another project," and I had a to-do list, and then I realized that my to-do list should also have a to-don't list. And so adopted the idea of the who, not how philosophy. Like, hey, who can I communicate with or delegate this to get stuff done? And then when I started incorporating my family, like that felt really good. In fact, 2 days ago, we had this massive event called LifeCon. Uh, so people think it's called Life Conference. It's actually Life Connectedness. And it's the first time we integrated spiritual leaders in with physicians in the same room and had a real open discussion about integrating spirituality into medicine. And then, of course, my wife was there, her sister was there, my daughters were there, and then all of a sudden, everything just clicked and became this sort of this magic, right? And they were really excited to be part of process, and because my 10-year-old tell you during the early days, she felt siloed by her daddy and her mommy because mommy's OBGYN, lots of calls, right? And my 8-year-old tell you, like, she also felt siloed, right? But now it's like getting into this. I'm also the busiest I've ever been in my life, and it's been amazing because I've been present as well, right? And so we don't have to suffer through the siloed effect. But let me ask you this: Are you a spiritual person?
Yes, spiritual in so many different
Yeah,
ways. Yes. I won't dig deeper unless you want me to.
I would love for you to dig deeper. That's why we're here in
Yeah.
the invisible reality, right? Yeah,
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. So I grew up in New York. I grew up to a mom who is 100% Italian, went to Catholic school her entire life.
yeah.
And my dad was raised Jewish. And so I'm what I affectionately refer to myself as a pizza bagel. And so I was actually raised with all the religions, right? I was raised to do all of the Catholic sacraments but I was also raised to understand and appreciate Judaism and essentially all religions. And so I grew up with this tremendous appreciation for religion. Wasn't until I found coaching that I actually started really integrating mindfulness into my life. So I grew up with religion, but I'm not sure I made the full connection between religion and mindfulness and how
Yeah.
the spirituality can connect all of those things.
Oh,
And
yeah.
it really has been amazing to see how all of these things are interconnected. And it's not necessarily separate entities of spirituality, but how these all there's an interconnectedness to it.
Oh, I love that, and that's so unique. And in my head, because I spent 7.5 years in New York. So the whole, like, pizza bagel thing's hilarious to me because I know exactly what that means, right? And my wife, her residency is LIJ, Long Island Jewish Hospital, and so I always grew up like this, but I grew up Buddhist, and also I appreciate all religions as well. But I think there's a bit of a difference between, like, religion and spirituality. Like, part of spirituality is the practice of, like, the mindset and stuff like that, right? You don't have to belong to a religion to be spiritual. But I just thought this whole pizza bagel concept is the wording is beautiful. So, but I don't think everyone understands this part. It's okay to be spiritual and a doctor, yes?
100%. And I would say that was actually part learning the spirituality and the
Yeah,
mindfulness has been a big part of my journey over the last couple of years, figuring out
same here.
we
Yeah,
one of the things, right? So I think a lot of doctors, and we don't always like to talk about it, can be very reactive.
yeah.
Right. And I was very reactive. Things weren't going well in the procedure room, and I would feel the tension rising, and it didn't always go well. And there's this quote, and I'm going to blank on who the quote is by, but maybe if I say the quote, it'll help. It's between reaction and response, there is a space. And in that space is our ability to choose our response. And that's not verbatim. And I'm blanking on who that quote is by right in this moment. But it was the mindfulness piece that helped me create the space so that I could choose my response. And you're right, mindfulness and spirituality, all of those things are.
Awesome. Yeah, I just Googled it real quick. I think it's Viktor Frankl.
Yes, thank you so much for I appreciate it.
Yeah, we wanna give credit where it's due, right? So I think so I'll read it, but you're 90% on. Between stimulus and response, there's a space. In that space is our power to choose our response. In our response lies our growth and our freedom. Viktor Frankl right there. I love it. That's a great quote. And this gets into an equation that I actually came up with when I started coaching business people in venture capitalism. And this equation is now on our website at Physician Transformation Institute. And it's an arithmetic equation. So expectations minus our perceived reality equals disappointment. So if our expectations are high and our reality is down here, that delta gap is our disappointment. But when we change our perceived reality to meet or exceed our expectations, then the disappointment becomes a negative number, right? Yeah. And I think
So good. So good. That is such a good math equation.
wow,
It's so important to raise awareness around it.
it
Sorry.
is. And tell you what, like this quote from Viktor Frankl actually embodies this equation, right? It's all about like understanding our perceived reality. And the other part is honoring that everyone have different perceived realities. No, it's okay not to have the same perceived reality, right? And understanding that was not something that I actually came across only until maybe 5 years ago through my own burnout. But my burnout was different. It was actually not through medicine. My burnout is that I'm like traditionally I've been very scatterbrained, doing all sorts of different things. And I realized that my burnout was coming from a question that I asked myself every morning. The question is, how do I make myself worthy today? That was the question that I asked myself every morning. And so it took a lot for me to reframe that question. Is not how do I make myself worthy because I'm already worthy. I'm full of deserving of self love. And I'll turn it into how can I make this better today? So to turn from lack into curiosity. So the scatterbrain became a lot less scatterbrain. And then the things I was doing became different. And I was able to not be so lost in the future, but stay in the present. Now, I'm still working on that, buddy. I still got some way to go, but it's a perpetual, never ending improvement, and I'm okay with it, right? And so this next question comes from this part because a lot of people are listening to this may be burnt out right now. They may not feel like they're in good space. Maybe they want to leave medicine. Maybe they want to do something different. When someone has the same mentality, I often find that if they choose different industries or jobs, they carry the mentality with them and burnout doesn't become any less. Do you agree with that?
100%. You if you don't do this work, the work that you have been doing, you just carry all of those behaviors and mindsets with you into your next career, and the pattern just repeats itself. And your surroundings may look different, your office may look different, your colleagues work look different, but your results are the exact same.
Yeah, because the patterns are the same, right? And I've seen people transition out of medicine. Actually, I've seen people transition into the medical field. Some people were coming from the corporate field and they got together with doctors and co-started a medical practice and thought everything's okay. I'm advising for one of the companies right now, actually. And a lot of it is, hey, the psychology is the same. Your patterns are the same. Your expectation is still here. Your perceived reality is still here. And your disappointment is still here, right? And switching that, I think, is incredibly powerful. Your last email out actually talked about this, and I thought about my equation, and there's this quote. It's a Brene Brown's quote. Shame corrodes the very part of us that believes we are capable of change. And no matter what industry you're in, that still stays with you, and the burnout's still there. But it was a very compelling quote. I think you emailed this out a few days ago, right?
That was yes.
And so, by the way, if you want to be on the Better Physician Life email list, go to betterphysicianlife.com. And on there, you'll find resources and the email list that you sign up to. And there's amazing resources on there that I've actually just looked at just now to update myself for this talk. And I'm going to be putting those email and resources on the Physician Transformation Institute.com as well. And so but this quote stuck with me because I know Brene's work very well, one of my inspirations. And this quote stuck with me once again is that shame corrodes the very part of us that believes we are capable of change. That brought me back to the day where I realized I woke up every morning asking myself, what can I do to make myself more worthy? Which turned into how do I feel that I become more deserving of love? How do I feel that I can forgive certain parts of myself, my life, maybe my parents, the way that I was brought up, right? And now it's a very different construct is that everything happened for a reason. And even though the events were identical, the shame went away. The corrosion actually went away, right? And I think that's the big part of living life really fulfilled. And part of fulfillment is the understanding that we can change our perceived realities. And so I recently just did a TV interview, and the topic is this: how do I perceive physician burnout? And it was really on the cuff because they didn't give me the topic beforehand. Okay, one of my initial reactions, and I said that burnout could be the absolute greatest gift that we can have. Do you agree with that?
It was for me because as you and I have been discussing here,
Yeah.
um, I had completely siloed myself in my physician identity, my clinical physician identity. And it was almost as though the burnout, well, I mean, it is. It wasn't almost as if it was that the burnout got so bad and I was suffering so much that I was looking for anything to relieve the suffering and the pain and the stress.
Yeah.
And all of a sudden, I realized the person who was causing all of the suffering was me. Just exactly with your equation that you were alluding to, right? My expectations of what my career was supposed to look like
Yeah.
was causing me so much pain and suffering. And when I could adjust that to what my reality was, and that my happiness didn't have to hinge on clinical medicine alone, that I could create whatever I wanted for my life, it blew the lid off of what my life could be. And so you're and all of this was a gift of physician burnout because had it not happened, I couldn't have made all of these other changes in my life.
Wow. And we perceive burnout as a gift. It's almost like it's the activation energy that we needed to respond to what type of perceived reality we really have, right? How do you think this mindset, now that you've adopted, are affecting your children?
Yeah, I mean, they honestly have been my greatest inspiration for this work,
Mm,
um, because I see so much of me particularly in my daughter, but in my son as well.
yeah,
And I don't think I was so indoctrinated into achievement culture.
same.
I didn't even realize any of this was happening. I thought I was just head down, focused, working on my goals, not realizing, yes, it's good in some ways, right? That motivation and determination pushed me to succeed in my life and in my career. And it took a toll as well. And so I think it is helping me to impart wisdom of somebody in his mid to late 40s into my 7 and 10-year-old kids so that they don't have to live their life trying to learn all of these lessons. They can start from a young age incorporating mindfulness and reframing and feeling your feelings, right? Not avoiding your feelings and trying to wish that they weren't there, but actually when you're feeling anxious, naming it, allowing yourself to be anxious, figuring out why you're anxious and then moving through it rather than around. These are skills that it took me until I was in my 40s to figure out. And now I get to teach my young children how to do this from go.
Wow, you really affected like your generational bloodline, I feel like, right? It's, yeah.
Hopefully.
Well, I think absolutely. I think that like the way we show up for our children or for our family and for our friends and for the patients, right? We're affecting multiple generational bloodlines. And I think that's really impactful. Which brings me to this next unpopular opinion, which I've always resonated with your message. So this is one of the first things that messages I received from you on an email list a while back. And it's this: is work-life balance was a fallacy, and what I really needed to create was life balance. This came from your first blog. Tell me about that. To dig a little deeper into that one.
Yeah. So work life balance is this concept that gets thrust upon us
Yes.
and it's us with judgment. And you brought up shame earlier, shame for not doing it
Yeah.
right. And this was huge for me when I first found physician coaching. And I just felt like I was doing it all wrong and I couldn't get it right. And no matter what I was doing, I could not create this work-life balance. And I remember being coached, Dr. Melanie Argo, and she basically just told me just to rid myself of this idea that I was ever going to achieve work-life balance. And since that time, I've developed it a little bit more in my mind because for me, the idea of work life balance is like chocolate milk, right? So we have life, which is milk, and then we add our medical careers, which is the chocolate syrup, and then we mix it all together, which is what medical training is, where we learn to basically bring medicine into our lives and make it a part of our lives, and then we finish our medical training, and then we're like, "Okay, nope, never mind. I need to separate my work out of my life." And it's like trying to filter out that chocolate syrup back out of the chocolate milk,
Oh,
and you just can't do it. Now, what you can do is figure out ways to live your life in a way that aligns with your values and your priorities. So you don't have to re-separate out the chocolate syrup from the milk. You just get to use it all as this one delicious glass of nourishment and figure out how you want to split it up amongst your family and your friends and your career and all the things that you want to be accomplishing in your life. And it just made such a huge change for me when I could shift and reframe how I was thinking about work life balance. It all changed. And then the shame and the judgment and the rest of it all just slowly dissipated.
yeah. And that's a very spiritual context as well. So in my culture, we have the Tao Te Ching is the book, right? And it's grounded in the identity of non-duality, which is they're not two separate things, everything is whole. And work-life balance is a dual concept, but non-duality allows us to always create different perceived realities. And so for those people who aren't familiar with non-dualism, it's basically a philosophical and spiritual concept that there's an absence of fundamental separation of anything that's in existence. So like work-life balance, the fact that you have the balance means that they're two different things, but it's actually like one thing. There's no good, there's no bad. In fact, you have to have good to have bad, right? And the two different sides of the coin. And my culture is that's what the yin yang is all about. It's a non-dual concept, right? And I've always thought that the term work-life balance, it didn't really sit well with me. It's actually repeated a lot in residency where I started doing different rotations and and people we had actually sessions on like work-life balance. And what I was taught in residency was that, hey, you come in, you do your job, and you go home and you have a drink, and then you relax a little bit and come back and do some more. I'm like, that's a very dual concept, right? But your chocolate milk example is like, yeah, like why extract the chocolate and the syrup from the milk? Like embody it, have a different perceived reality onto it, and create that life balance. When we look at that concept, I think it's about embracing and not marginalization. I think it's we start embracing ourselves and start embracing the mindset that this is the way we are, and therefore burnout can be a curse or burnout can be a gift. And it's because it's non-dual, it doesn't really matter. And statistically speaking, if you were able to power through something, work through something, you're going to be successful on the other side. And it's okay if you have a downturn again, because that's the duality of the nature of life. But from a non-dual concept means that hey, the ups and downs are really part of life, and that to me, that's what life balance was. And that right there, what we just talked about, is the reason I actually decided to form a nonprofit is because of what you talked about a year and a half ago, which was this concept of it's not work life balance, it's life concept. So Physician Transformation Institute is designed to be like it doesn't matter what industry you're in, what kind of doctor you are, as long as you're human, we have the ability to create this perceived reality. So I want to thank you for that. I really want to thank you for that opportunity for me to create this beautiful organization.
I am just floored. It has taken, for me, like, so much work and effort to lean into the vulnerability of putting myself out there, of putting my work out into the world, of imagining other people reading it and or listening to it and judging me. And So often we focus on that aspect, on the trolls aspect of our work. And one of the reframes for me has always been to imagine, like, what is the positive impact of putting this work out into the world? And I just want to thank you so much for sharing that. I had no idea about the impact of we're talking about an email and a blog post that went out a year and a half
Yep.
ago, and so just thank you. Thank you for sharing that, and I'm so incredibly grateful and also excited for you. I mean, that's amazing. Thank you.
No, thank you so much. And it resonated well with me. And man, but what you just talked about, like the focusing on like the shame, what goes out, how you're judged, yeah, that's a real thing. And we deal with it all the time, right? But at the end of the day, it's not even about us. It's about like why we do it, right? And I look at my children, they're my inspiration. Of course, I'm going to send this email out. Sure, let's go ahead and do it, right? What's the worst thing that can happen? I get judged? Cool. Okay. But if I can teach my kids that there's so much love that's reverberated back, it becomes a beautiful thing. But we're also interviewing at a time that's 2 days after my coming out event of the Physician Transformation Institute presenting itself to the general public, which is LifeCon. And LifeCon 24 just happened in Houston, Texas at the Thompson Hotel. And I'm still getting messages of the transformations that people have. And what I noticed is that people are so surprised when I share burnout figures, right? Like 24% of physicians in the Medscape article, this is back in 23, consider themselves to be clinically depressed. More than half of physicians consider themselves to be burnt out, right? And then there's also like suicidal ideation at 11%, which is incredibly high. And so when I share this, the general public is like, well, why? Like, it doesn't make any sense. Like, you guys are doctors, aren't you? And what happened is that I was speaking on stage and other physicians speaking on stage, and then it became evident, abundantly clear that we're all human. And the burnout comes when we try to be heroes. We try to be caregivers, giving ourselves. And instead of heroes, we should really be guides for people rather than hero concepts, right? Because heroes suffer a lot of tragedy and self blame and guilt and shame. That's what happens in all the movies, right? And but as a guide, we're able to be detached from their outcome because we already know the other person we're talking to is going to be successful no matter what. And what they're going through is part of the phase of life, right? And so the hero versus guide concept is what transformed my clinical practice of my practitioners and clinicians into a whole hours burnout. And then now we're able to share it with the world. But that goes back into the non dual concept. It's not work life balance. This is life balance, right? And so, do you have any thoughts on the whole like hero's journey versus the guy's journey? Have you ever looked into anything like that?
Haven't, but I feel like that has been a little bit of my path as well,
Yeah.
right? This has been how I have approached clinical
Yeah.
medicine is walking alongside my
Long,
patients, right?
long.
Not feeling like I know better, but trying to what are the things that I know and where are you coming from and how do we work together to achieve the best possible clinical outcome? And so I totally see how that can be incorporated into all of the different aspects of both the clinical work, the entrepreneurial work,
Yeah.
and then the physician wellness work, of course.
Yeah, absolutely. So in the business side, there's a really popular gentleman by the name of Don Miller. And Don
Mhm.
Miller wrote several books. And one of them is basically his concept of telling a story called Story Brand. And he actually wrote a book that's somewhere behind my hood over there on coaching. But he talked about a true coach is one that is always going to be in the guide position. So if you were in the movie Star Wars, you want to be Yoda and not Luke, right? You don't want your arm cut off and with a lightsaber. You want to be the person that's always gathering advice. And even after Yoda passed away, he's still there in spirit, right? And this concept really comes from one of my spiritual readings in the Tao. And it's this quote. It's a really loose English translation from the Chinese words, but this is it right here. True leaders are hardly known for their followers. After them are the leaders the people know and admire, and after them are the ones that they fear, right? To give no trust is to get no trust. And this is what you're talking about. We're going alongside people as part of a leadership. And being a leader, we're that guide. We're either alongside them or maybe we're behind them a little bit. But are we ever really in front of them? And I think as doctors, we're taught to lead in front of them. And if there's any poor outcomes, we're taught to putting the blame on ourselves versus no, the true story is the patient or our children or my wife. Like they're the actual heroes of their own story. And the things that we were taught to be their heroes, that comes from ego. And that comes from a different understanding of what a hero really is. And I think that this understanding that true leaders are hardly known for their followers is extraordinarily important because after I pass away, I want my children to be themselves and be their own leaders as well. My understanding of this also is coming from a different concept that I don't think most people get exposed to is that the word doctor comes from the Latin word docere is to lead or be a scholar. It has dual meanings there. And so a doctor is a teacher or a scholar or a leader. It's already in the root of the actual word. And it wasn't until maybe 100 years ago that doctor title really became something a little bit different. But all we're really doing is honoring the title that we're actually given, the one who teaches, the one who's a scholar. Now, when I tell my patients the root word of the doctor, they start laughing. They're like, I don't really see the doctor as a teacher. They just want to, do something real fast, type their notes, prescribe something, and get things done and get me out. Right. What do you wish people knew, or what do you wish the field of medicine can transform into, knowing are the values that you have adopted very recently?
A message to your patients that kind of see their physicians in that way
Yeah.
is right. This is the system we're all confined to
Mm.
at this particular point in
Yeah.
time, right? And in a lot of ways, physicians are, and it's a little bit sad to say, we are like the cashiers at Target, and our job is to function in the way that we have been hired to function. And we don't always have a lot of latitude with time. We can use our knowledge and our expertise to take care of them, but we are fixed in the amount of time that we have and also by what we are allowed to prescribe and do within the confines of that time based on what their insurance will allow. And so I think when we're thinking about how can physicians move forward, what would I love to see? I think, so many physicians are waiting for somebody to come and save us, waiting for something to
Yeah.
change.
Yeah.
And in my coaching, what I try to show physicians is, or try to teach them, is how to be a surfer, right? So surfers don't sit out in the middle of the ocean on their surfboard,
Mm.
banging their their fists down on the surfboard because the waves aren't coming the way that they want them to. The waves that come are the waves that they ride, and they figure out how to ride the wave in the best way possible. And so, what I try to encourage physicians to do is to be the change that they want to see, to learn to surf the waves in a way that is true and authentic to them. And as they change and find out how they want to function and act in the healthcare environment, the systems are forced to change alongside of us. If we change, things can't stay the same. And what that looks like is going to be different for different people, whether that is modifying how we show up in our clinical work or deciding to pursue out activities outside of our clinical work. All of those things are different based on the individual, but we can't sit around waiting for something else to change. We get to be an example of what that change looks like.
Well, be an example. And to be an example, we have to also adopt the mentality. Yes, one, we are worth it. We totally deserve it. And things don't have to be perfect for us to execute, right? Because otherwise we're just gonna feel stuck and overwhelmed. But we want to be able to have that feeling of stuck and overwhelmed, not blame it or say we're not good enough, but stuck and overwhelmed is also a gift, just like burnout. That it is the activation energy for us to really get to the next level, right? And my final question for you today before we conclude is now that you talk to physicians, What are like some similarities in the things that they go through that you hear like over and over again that you just wish everyone knew or understood?
This is such a great question because there is so much that we all have in
Yeah,
common, and we are all trained to see the differences in what our career paths look like, or where we practice, or what it looks like when we walk out the door. But the truth is, there is so much that we all have in common. I would say one of the things that I hear over and over again is actually something that you were just alluding to, which is that physicians just feel stuck.
uh,
They don't know where they're going. They don't know what's next, and they don't know how to even figure it out. And so that is incredibly common. I also so many physicians are just looking for to make connection. They're looking for friendship. They're looking for kind of just people to talk to and ways of building and strengthening the relationships that already exist, creating new ones.
yeah.
So common. We've talked about life balance, another huge one. All of these things just come up over and over again.
Wow. Yeah, absolutely. And I guess like, I actually now have another follow-up question to this one. That was gonna be the final one. And this is actually my sister's favorite question when she interviews people is she calls it why bother? Like, why bother spending so much time building your company better physician life? Like, why bother doing all this? Like, what's compelling for
Think we were just talking about the tides of healthcare,
you? Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And doing the things that we see in our power
Yeah.
to change the trajectory of what healthcare looks like. And in my mind, physicians stepping back, putting their heads down, working in these systems that feel oppressive, that feel like we are questioning our value and our worth and what we are bringing to the table. It feels so heavy. And I feel like for me, if I can help even just one physician decide not to, say, leave clinical practice, not only do I help that one physician, but I help every physician, every patient that physician then goes on to help treat, heal, moving on in the future. And so the impact is incredible. And if I can help just one physician to stop suffering, it is completely worth it. And there is so much suffering out there. And so those are the reasons. That's my why. And don't get me wrong, there are days where I ask myself, like, why are you doing this? Wouldn't it be just so much easier to just go take a nap, to just go for a walk, to do anything other than sit down and write a blog post or an email or a social media post or any of those other things? And yeah, it would be easier, but it wouldn't be creating the impact and the change that I think is so necessary in healthcare right now. And so it all becomes worth it.
Man, this is the ripple effect, right? It's like
Yeah.
you have a drop in a pond and ripples through, and it's really amazing. Well, awesome. Well, so how can people find you?
Again, thank you so much for having me. I
Yeah.
genuinely love this conversation. I thought it was great. So you can find me at my website, betterphysicianlife.com. I have lots of free resources. We talked about the blog, we talked about the podcast, Doctors Living Deliberately. And then we also mentioned one of the big things that physicians are facing right now is trying to figure out, like, I'm stuck, what's next? And so I actually created a free resource on my website uh, to help physicians figure out what's next. And again, it's not limited to either leaving clinical medicine or staying in clinical medicine. Because as a coach, my job, I don't know better than you, right? I don't know what you want in your life better than you. So I take you through the exercise of helping you figure out how to get unstuck and how to figure out what's next for you. So that's available as a free resource on the website.
So it's on the website, betterphysicianlife.com, right?
That's right. Yes.
Awesome. And if you're watching this either on YouTube or in our app, it's going to be in the description. The link will be in the description, which is the website and everything. And if you're actually listening to this on Spotify or Apple on the Invisible Reality podcast, go to betterphysicianlife.com and get this guide. I think it's really incredible. Sometimes all it takes is one small step for our entire perceived reality to change. Thank you for fulfilling my dream of me interviewing you after all this. I really enjoyed the conversation. This is even better than I even imagined. So I want to thank you for that.
Well, again, thank you so much. I to hear that a single email kind of inspired you to go on and do all of these amazing things, create an incredible resource for medical students, residents, physicians at large. I can't even describe to you what that feels like to me. So thank you again for sharing that, and thank you so much for having me. I really love chatting with you.
Yeah, it is my pleasure. Once again, betterphysicianlife.com. Go check them out.